Hi, I'm Carl Franklin, and in this episode of Blazor Train, I speak with Microsoft's Jeff Fritz, who's been thinking about Blazor from a WebForms perspective for a long time.
WebForms sucks.
Jeff is spearheading a community project that I think you're going to like. Well, here are the facts. 1, there are still lots of web apps running on WebForms. 2, Microsoft chose not to support WebForms in .NET Core and .NET 5. So that means there are a lot of projects out there that need to be rewritten if they want to move forward.
Suckers!
Go away! Because of its component model, Blazor is the closest thing to the WebForms syntax we've ever seen. And Jeff and his friends are going to try to help you bridge the gap so you can migrate your WebForms projects to Blazor. And that's all coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train! Well, I'm very excited to have my friend Jeff Fritz here. Jeff, when I think of WebForms and Blazor, I think of you naturally. I can't think of anybody who thinks more about these two things, or at least Blazor from a web form programmer's perspective. So what do you got for us today?
So WebForms has been like a fungus. It's just been around for years and years and years, and I can't get rid of it. I'm constantly thinking about WebForms because I know
creams. You tried ointments.
I applied a little DevOps. Donovan told me to do that. It didn't help.
A little squirt DevOps.
Yeah, no. So folks have a lot of WebForms applications out there, right? ASP.NET WebForms. Those applications we've been building since 2001. You see the .aspx file names, the .ascx, .asmx, .ashx files out there, and you know it's a WebForms application.
Right.
I commented to some folks back in 2019 when we were able to fly around, and go to airports and that. I was at one airport and I saw a WebForms error page on one of the airport the
monitors.
Departure flights.
Yeah, I've seen it too.
The monitors. And it's the yellow page. It's the error page. It's like,
dev.
Don't you know how to properly handle that?
Yeah.
Anyways, so they're out there. They're all over the place. And the question that I hear from a lot of folks is, what do I do after .NET Framework 4.8? Well, the team, the .NET team, the ASP.NET team has said, well, we're not going to support WebForms in .NET Core.
Yeah.
Okay. So other folks have ways that they've worked around this, and they've taken WebForms and they've put it into a slightly different model. And we see things like the .vvm project out there, where you can code in a similar way, but you end up rewriting your application in .NET Framework, and it because it uses that user interface framework, that framework is compatible over to .NET Core.
Suffice to say that the before Blazor, there really weren't any good viable alternatives for moving a WebForms application into something like it.
Yeah, right. Because when we think of MVC, when we think of the other web frameworks that are out there, nothing is that component-based model that we're used to with WebForms, right? Build a component, put it into some sort of a page thing, and you compose your user interface at that point. You have some events that you can handle. Right. It's good like that. But Blazor, we know you can do that. You can build components. Your components actually are the same structure as pages. Well, if we can build and make something that looks and feels WebForms-ish, maybe there's an opportunity there to move forward.
And moving forward is important because, I mean, one of the big reasons why WebForms is being deprecated, I guess you would say, is that it's not all that efficient with modern browsers and the way modern web applications work, right? There's a lot of data that gets passed around and state isn't all managed all that well. So now with Blazor, you have an opportunity to do things the right way and minimize traffic and maximize the efficiency of all the code and still have that nice component model that you speak of.
Right. I mean, WebForms later in its life got the ability to output HTML5 more efficient tags and encodings. It gained the ability to work with model bindings so that you didn't push as much data around, but there were still things like view state and post back that, you could easily abuse and create problems. There were framework issues with it where it was so tightly coupled to IIS, to the Internet Information Server, that there were points where it went back and forth into the web server process and back into your code to render things and pass data back and forth. Just an inefficient framework for what we want to accomplish.
Right. It doesn't move away from IIS very well.
No. And when we think about some of the things that we do in modern development with containers and orchestrators like Kubernetes and wanting to be able to scale our applications in the cloud, WebForms is really hard to do that. It's not just a bolt on to it, but you end up having to change a lot of your code dramatically to consider more than one web server.
So by now, people are smitten with Blazor, and we've got this WebForms thing here. How on earth are we going to move / rewrite, refactor? How do we go? How do we begin to think about doing this monumental task?
It's going to be a little bit easier than you might think. It's actually harder to migrate from WebForms to MVC because MVC is a paradigm shift.
Right.
But Blazor's the same concept. It's concept compatible. Okay. So this is an application from our eShop demos that we have, right? This is part of we being the folks on the .NET team, the .NET architecture guidance books that we have available for you out there. And this is a particular instance from what we call eShop on Blazor.
Okay.
But it's a storefront, right? It's got some .NET Foundation shirts and mugs and things just to put together a simple storefront. This isn't real. You can't order these things from this storefront, but this is a demo to show what it might look like. It's the I Buy Spy of 2020, you'd say. Yeah. And it's pretty simple here. If we go over and look at the source code, here, the source code, we have an index page, a default page that, this is garden variety web forms running here in the background. Yep. It's got a content block with a list view that has templates inside of it that help generate that table of products, right? Because it effectively does a for loop across this with data binding to output the information about the various items. And when we think about this as either an MVC developer or as a Blazor developer, I look at this layout and I'm immediately thinking, I can do a for loop and right? I can Blazorify this.
Blazorize.
No problem. So what does that mean if we want to take our business logic and things and still make this user interface framework work? So one of the first things that I tell folks is separate your web forms from your business logic.
Yes.
Even your data fetch logic, get them separated. Get those data sources that you might have had on page, get rid of them, put them somewhere else so that we can turn them into .NET Standard class libraries. .NET Standard we know can be reused between .NET Framework and .NET Core, Blazor. So if we start moving them in that direction, now it becomes interesting for us to be able to use the same logic, the same user interface, hopefully, between Blazor Server, maybe even Blazor WebAssembly, but let's target Blazor Server. So it's the exact same hosting model as we're doing with WebForms. But if we're using .NET Standard for some of that content, now I can use the same library both in my new user interface front end and my existing one. So to start the migration process, I tell folks, run that API portability analyzer and start looking at what's involved in actually getting your code into .NET Standard. So I'm going to stop the application. And if I scroll down here, so here's my eShop legacy web forms up here at the top, and there's everything that makes up that project. And you can see I've even got some services here, Carl, and these kind of make sense. I've got a catalog service. I've got a mocked version of my catalog service. And when you look at this, it's just doing some entity framework interactions to go get items from the catalog.
Right.
So perfect candidate for move this out somewhere else where we can start to reuse some of that content, start to make it a little bit easier to interact with. So in our initial working through and building with this, we started to see that, okay, move that content out. And then we start thinking about how we build a component for that for loop on the front page that we were looking at. So here I just went to another instance of this. I just checked out the next version from a branch in source control. Okay. And I created a library here, a .NET Standard library, and I put into it all of my objects, my business objects that I'm going to present on the user interface. Right. My catalog brand, my catalog items here, my interface for interacting with my database, some pre-configured data that I'm going to load up so that I've got content in my catalog, and a view model that I can work with.
Good.
So now, if I go back into my WebForms application, I can do a little bit of refactoring so that instead of getting that catalog service and having everything coupled directly inside of this web form, I now have it being delivered using dependency injection and being made available here using that same class library. So if I go find, I believe it is in my... I'm trying to remember where I put it. Here we go. So there's my configuration for how I'm going to load up my data, right? I've got a container here, dependency injection container to do service location and load up everything. And it will make things available for me. So more information about tracking my web requests so I can do some other interesting things. No matter. So I can start to now think about building a Blazor application. So if I look at the Blazor version of this and I show you what my default page looks like for this, I can start to think about, oh, it's over on the other side here. I can start to think about building that for loop. So, div at the top with a little create new, just like I had previously. And I've got some if statements here, and I'm really hand coding the interaction and building out what this data looks like. I'm going to put some sort of a for loop in here, and I've got previous next buttons at the bottom using the same model.
But you've got all the markup that you used in ASP.NET Web Forms, the same markup.
You got it. In fact, let me bring up that page. Here's the default page.
Yeah.
And if we really put these two next to each other, right? So we start with the Razor page directive up top to indicate where we're listening from. We have a Razor component we inherit from so that we can put code behind the scenes. But my content here is pretty much the same on both sides. Let me shrink the font size there just a little bit so you can see. I mean, div class, there, ESH table, create new, and it's an A run at, and instead of it being a route URL, route thing over here, well, we're just hard coding to catalog create to create a new item. Table, I mean, this looks the same just with the if else.
Sure.
And at some point, we're going to have a table body here with that for loop.
Right.
Who cares, right? I mean, that's okay, fine.
You're just getting ready.
At some point, you're going to go and fill that out, and you're going to build out the other pages for create and interact and all that stuff. And you end up with something that looks, we'll let this reload here, something that looks like, well, I can create a component called list view that does something similar.
Nice.
Right? So if I'm thinking like a Blazor developer, and instead of writing my for loop directly in here, if I write a list view that does that table with the for each, with a little row template that outputs things.
Yeah, render fragments for your templates, your header, your row template, your empty data template. So you've essentially created the Blazor version of a list view.
Right. If we start to think about ASP list view and its features as a component, as a Blazor component that has the same name, has the same attributes, renders the same way, now we're talking. Right now, I can clearly, as a WebForms developer, see that empty data template, right? Layout template. Well, it's not quite here. Maybe I can do a layout template somehow. But if I can end up with the same thing, it might work, right? And we define a row template in this initial cut at this. Now, you can see here, my friend Daniel Roth helped me build this initial one. And as we were walking through and building this demo that we were going to present at a conference more than a year ago now, it felt like, well, wait a sec. Yeah, we can put the same API, the same tags and attributes together, and it would be really compelling. All I have to do then would be just take off ASP : in front and change things so that instead of it being right the bee sting notation here to do data binding to the razor notation.
Right. But it's essentially the same.
It's essentially the same. So
that begs the question, and I know you've been thinking about this. This is just for what is it? The list view. You could do this for so many more components.
Yes.
It seems like somebody should, tackle the data grid or some other bigger controls like that. Oh yeah. So we put together our own version of list view that has the exact same tags. Yeah. That's great.
Item placeholder ID, run at, item type. We have to add context. That's a Blazor-y thing that we have to do, and I converted ID to ref, but empty data template, and it's all the same. Layout template, we have to give it a context so we can get the placeholder, the item placeholder entry instead of ASP placeholder, but everything is the same.
Theoretically, if you had all these controls that had the same behavior and the same IDs or the same interface, for lack of a better word, then you could sort of write a wizard to convert pages, couldn't you?
You could.
One might speculate.
What if we did?
What if you did?
What if we did?
Did you?
So, what?
No way.
So here's what we've done.
Okay.
We've taken this idea and we've turned it into what we call Blazor WebForms components. And the Blazor WebForms components, this is a project I've been working on my Twitch channel. And slowly over the past 9 months, we've been building and adding components. Now, we're specifically targeting the components that come in the box with ASP.NET Core.
Yeah.
So we support all of these ones that are linked right now. Now, they're not all completely fit and finished and done.
Right.
But
here, let me get out.
We're seeking feedback. We're trying to build the most common features so that you can do things like
oh, there we go.
like list view, grid view, form view. Right? The login controls, they all work.
Wow.
Tree view, it works. In fact, Carl, we put together a live sample running on Azure that you can click through here and see what it looks like using those exact same components. Now,
No kidding.
we've been just throwing stuff onto this page just to get it out there. At some point, we're going to redo this website so it's a little bit clearer what happens after you migrate to Blazor. And notice I call this site after Blazor server side.
Sure.
Because we also want to see what it looks like with WebAssembly.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So, the tree view down here on the side, that's the WebForms tree view migrated to Blazor.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So
That's fantastic.
Thank you. So if I go into the tree view over here, see, I don't even have my CSS set up right at all.
Yeah,
it's
all right.
Goofy here. But I can click in and we support showing the lines, right? The various lines for it. The various image sets, they're all supported in here so that it looks and behaves appropriately, right? There's checkboxes. Yep, we support the checkboxes also, right? There's all the validation components. They're done. They're built. They're out there and you can interact with. Form view, data list. We were just doing some work on the button, right? Button. Why the heck do you need a button component? Well, there was a button component.
That's right. If
and
you're going to
want to,
you're going to want to migrate it.
Exactly. You don't want to have to rewrite. So, right? I can click and fire a command. I can trigger JavaScript from the button. Okay, yeah, that works. We can do the various button styles. Of course, that works. And you can even do things like the CSS rounded corners that folks do now. Yeah. That works. We just finished today the ability to turn off causes validation. Neat. So this is a range box. And if I key in a number that's outside the range, it doesn't validate because I turned off validation on this. And we're going to add more samples here so folks understand what's going on.
Right.
But the idea is we've got features and the ability to see what's going on building out here. We want to make it easy for folks to get here. Now,
so I see grid view, but I don't see data grid. A data grid is probably the granddaddy of all the controls, isn't it?
It's the older one. Right. And folks really migrated from data grid to grid view. Right. I mean, data grid was out there and honestly, I think they stopped supporting it altogether.
Oh, really?
It's been a long time. And encouraged folks, get over to grid view.
Okay.
So, but the grid view supports binding to all kinds of different capabilities here, binding to the buttons. Yep. Works properly, templating.
So the grid view doesn't have editing, like row editing and all that stuff the data grid has?
Does. We didn't build that feature yet.
Oh, cool.
It's an open source project.
It's been so long since I've done WebForms that I don't even remember what you could do. The last time I did, data grid was the way to go.
It was. And grid view has all of those features and just a little bit more. The edit, create, delete records. Yeah, you can add those on. They were a set of columns you could put on the end. We just haven't built it yet. We're trying to get the read-only states working first.
Right.
And then come back and do a lot of those edit things. Because you're right. The grid is a monster component. It is a monster.
And I think probably the most highly leveraged control possibly in WebForms, like everybody, because it does so much.
It does, right? And when you think about that, even that storefront website, right, you're going to have somewhere behind the scenes some reports, some management screen that has, here's a grid of orders, a grid of, accounting records, all those things. Grids are everywhere in this framework. They really are.
So is the idea that we want to get you from WebForms to Blazor to running to functional, and then probably a good idea is for you to start, refactoring and moving and changing the way things work with new third-party controls, maybe with different ways to architect things. Yeah.
But if we can make that changeover, make that rewrite as painless as possible, as quick as possible. Yeah. And if we can get you to 80-90% complete, and after you've migrated things to .NET Standard
Yep.
and gone through and done some of this processing, you're in really good
shape.
much better place than having to say, well, I need to take a year and a half to rewrite my application to get out of WebForms.
Because then theoretically you could also take the components in server and just publish that as a separate .NET Standard library, which is something that we're going to be doing in Blazor Train. And now you can import that into a WebAssembly application, right? And you could you could move all that stuff to WebAssembly, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
The same
What if I told you-
component model works in both.
What if I told you we already did?
You're full of surprises today, Jeff.
So
wow.
let me go over to that project. I can
Okay.
show you. I called the solution Blazor meets WebForms because I didn't have a name for it. I just called it Blazor meets WebForms.
Okay.
So in my samples up here, I have Blazor client after Blazor client side, Blazor server side before WebForms, my shared sample objects, my public documentation repository that we haven't really started on yet, but that's where it's going to live.
Jeff, you're going all max headroom on me here. I'm going to try to keep up.
Watch this. Here we go.
Okay.
So inside, I want to get things into Blazor server side.
Right.
So I have pages with all of those control samples that you saw.
Yep.
On client side, I've created under pages, I've got the exact same control samples, but you see the little glyph there on the bottom corner?
Yeah, those are
That means that
reference by link, right?
Yeah.
Add link, add files by link. Yeah.
Yep.
That's great.
So I've actually just included all of the control samples in this version of the project.
Nice.
And it runs on WebAssembly the exact same way.
That's so cool.
Because they're just components. They've got the exact same syntax.
And the cool thing about this is now you have what you had before with WebForms was this server model. You have the Blazor server model. Now you can take all those components and run them all on the browser. Like, fantastic.
So if you build and migrate and you want to do it, here they are running with WebAssembly. So thank you.
Bravo, sir. So this is obviously
Thank
a
you.
community project, right?
Yes, this is very much a community project.
This isn't a Microsoft sanctioned kind of,
No.
guidance for moving to WebForms. This is really a Jeff thing.
This is a Jeff and Jeff's community thing, and with an eventual goal of we get enough components built, make it easy enough to migrate that .NET Foundation picks up and says, yes, we want to make this a part of official recommendation.
Right.
We're not there yet.
Yeah.
We're probably a few months away, but we have some documentation that we're building every time there's a new release.
Great.
That goes through and has information about all the controls and even how to get started migrating.
All right,
What's
Jeff,
involved.
now it's resource time. Tell us how we can download these things, how we can start playing with them, and also tell us about your show and all the different things that you do.
Sure. So the project is sitting out here on GitHub. It's at github.com/Fritz and Friends because it's not my repository.
Yeah.
It's the community's /Blazor WebForms components. And that's where you can learn more about the project. If you scroll down here, there's links to go out and get the NuGet package. There's links if you want to take a look at our Azure pipelines, you want to participate in the Gitter, you want to take a look at the documentation and even participate. There's a whole bunch of issues out there and a really good community of folks that are contributing in building these components and making sure they work properly. We even use Eagle Hansen's B-Unit framework to test these and make sure they generate the exact same markup.
And we'll be talking about that in a upcoming episode of Blazor Train as well.
tremendous framework. If you're serious about building enterprise grade applications with Blazor, whether it's with WebAssembly or server side, you gotta use it. We've been kicking the tires on that project for months and months, and he's actually become a contributor to this project, helping out making better unit tests for this. And we've been exercising and contributing back features to the test library to make sure that it supports some of the cool things we need to do as well. So
now I gotta think that a big stumbling block for a lot of people that have projects, ASP.NET WebForms projects in production, is that they're using third-party components, right?
mm-hmm.
And those third-party components don't have, some of them do. I mean, actually, many of the third-party components have Blazor versions, but they're not necessarily syntactically the same,
Absolutely.
So, but at least it's a start.
It's a start, and what our community wants to do once we've got that first release of compatibility, right? Maybe it doesn't support all the features, but a first release that addresses all of the controls. We want to reach out to some of the control vendors, the Infragistics, the Telerik, the DevExpress, show them how we've done this, and encourage them to build a similar shim so that,
Right.
your folks are going to use the same markup, but they're using the new version of your Blazor components.
And again, it's just so that they can get it up and running and working.
Exactly.
And see how everything is going to work together. And then they can start, customizing and chipping off pieces. Yeah.
Yep. And the idea here is to make this as simple as possible.
Right.
So, Carl, what if I told you that we have a group that's working on automating this?
Yes. Bring it on. Yes, I am. I'll drink to that. I've got my polar seltzer right here. And that's not a plug.
There you go. See that? So we have.
Unless they want to pay me for product placement.
They're not quite ready yet. I would ask that maybe we revisit this in about October, November.
Okay.
But we have some initial samples working, proof of concepts working with the controls that we have right now. We have to do a little bit of refactoring, but we're hoping to roll out a V1 with .NET Conf in November.
Wow.
And from our initial samples using, do you remember the old wingtip toys sample?
Yeah.
The old WebForms, and it was that I Buy Spy type of storefront.
Sure.
We have that converting using these components 100% complete using the new Blazor components that we have here. We are
so awesome.
Really excited to finish getting that working with some of the other components and some of the other samples that are out there.
Well, Jeff, this is great news. Again, you didn't really plug yourself, did you? So
no, I didn't yet.
See, you do a Twitch show. You do.
Yep.
You have Twitter. You've got all sorts of things.
So I'm on Twitch. I'm on Twitter. I'm on GitHub. I'm on TikTok. No, I don't put anything on TikTok. But I'm C# Fritz everywhere. Okay, C#, CSHARP, FRITZ. You can find me in all those locations. Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday mornings. You can find me on Twitch. 9 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday and Thursday. 10 a.m. Eastern on Sunday. I like to sleep in on Sunday, Carl.
Yeah.
Can you blame me?
That'd be nice.
And Monday mornings, you can find me on the Visual Studio channel on Twitch at 9 a.m. Teaching a new show called C# with C# Fritz for beginners getting started with writing code.
That's great. Jeff, thanks very much. This is enlightening, to say the least, and very encouraging. I'm sure you'll find it that way too. Now back to you in the studio, Carl.
Lots of well-meaning developers disparage WebForms, but in its day, WebForms was revolutionary. And now there's a project afoot to help you migrate from WebForms to Blazor. And here's a shortcut to the Fritz and Friends GitHub repo. Enjoy. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time.
Blaze a trail.